Letterpress describes printing from a raised surface. So it could be lead type, it could be wood type, it could be linoleum. It's a relief process. So a raised surface, applying ink, and the paper makes contact with that raised surface and the ink gets embedded into the paper. It sort of straddles craft and commercial and fine art. It's sort of a huge continuum. It's a growing community of printers, and same thing is happening all over the place, but it's sort of busting wide open. It's strange that per capita we probably have way more letterpress printers than anywhere else. I can't explain that. Maybe it's something in the water. With letterpress printing, each letter has to be hand set, even tiny 8-point type, 6-point type. And we use a composing stick, a special tool to get that all set up. And you have a lot of nuances about, first of all, the type that you choose, and details like how it's going to work on the paper. You can choose the paper specifically to enhance the look of letterpress printing. So I like really thick, lush, handmade papers that show the impression. Offset printing doesn't have any impression, it's just flat. When I started printing 25 years ago, I was partner in a design firm and we had a press, and we started incorporating letterpress printing as part of our business. And we had to try and convince people that letterpress was awesome, and here's why you might want to pay to have your wedding invitation printed this way, and why we sent out promotional materials. So the big change in this 25-year period is people now all know what letterpress printing is. I don't have to educate anybody about it. There's a big value. On the downside, as a printer, it's a lot more competitive. There's a lot more printers out there. But that makes me happy. I think it'll preserve the equipment and the interest. I have heard other printers worried about the bubble, that it's going to burst like it's been this fad, and I hope that's not true.
Waste use is a funny word because it's, we don't know the etymology of it, and so it is basically a festival that a master printer put on for the underprinters, usually on St. Bartholomew's Day in August. Now, in modern times, it's kind of more just printers coming together. And in a lot of places that do waste use, they are a little more printer, and then ours is open to the public, so it's kind of showcasing the printer's art to the public. The public is very savvy. Like 10 years ago, they would ask questions about, like, oh, do you just press buttons on a machine and then, the type goes down, and it's like, no, it's all hand set, that sort of thing. And now they're pretty savvy and will come into Jessica's studio during studio tours and ask questions that I can't answer because they're that advanced. So the public knowledge has increased greatly.
When I started working on this exhibition, I knew I was going to be looking at contemporary prints, and then really started thinking about how for this community it really included letterpress, and I realized I didn't know anything about it. Thankfully, I was able to go talk to Jessica and talk about what letterpress was now and what this community, how it got started and what all was happening in the community. I knew it was very active here in Tacoma, but I was trying to look across the Northwest, and so I started looking in Portland and looking in Spokane and all out in these other areas and finding it was really active. And was really curious about how you got interested in it in the first place. sweet because I didn't know the story of how you've gotten working with it with King's Books and all those sorts of things.
Yeah, it was kind of a natural progression. At King's Books, we do a lot of work with the community in different communities, and Jessica Spring had come in installing an exhibit. So we just kind of came up with the idea. The first Wastegoose was 6 tables, and then it's just gone on from there to, like, you know, over 50 artists represented and steamroller printing and everything. So it's just been kind of a natural evolution, kind of a conversation. We at the bookstore can be a place for different communities and have helped to increase the profile, I think, in Tacoma.
How many years now?
We just had our 10th, so.
10th year.
Yeah,
And when did the
2000.
steamroller, which is always the
That
first,
was
the high point is the giant
the
steamroller.
7th year of this?
Yeah, 6th or 7th, yeah. I think we've also seen, like, especially in the first years of the Wastegoose, there'd be the curmudgeonly old printers that would come and kind of be like, what are you people doing? Kind of like testing the knowledge and asking questions in a way that we don't get as much anymore because it's kind of established itself. I mean, there's still people that come, but there was like the old guard, if you will. It was kind of like,
That's not printing.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that there's been education around that.
Yeah, and I think the innovation has really been rewarded with more interest from the larger community when they start to understand what we're doing and appreciate it. It's pretty exciting.
Well, what I found really fascinating about it and talking with you and then some of the other people you put me on to and then just getting out there was that how all the layers of it, that it's not just the image, it's not just the text, but that the font has a history, and that maybe even the making and the carving of the font has a history, and then the paper you choose has a history, and something in what you use to make it, or the texture of it, and then the composition itself and how things are arranged. I mean, they're so complicated in a way that people look at them, it's like, oh, nice image and a little bit of text for that poem, and how sweet that's a bird illustrating the bird poem, but there's all this other information in there too, which I think is really fascinating.
I think that's a really great point, that you can enjoy it on so many levels or get into it as deeply as you want or not. And as a maker, I love that part about it because I can totally geek out. Even if it looks like a simple composition, there's, you know, all the stuff behind it.
Your work that's in the show, Spicerography, which was this kind of tour de force. That's one of the things I love about it, is that it is all those layers, so that the fonts it's, you know, you should describe your own work, but I love the fact, I mean, for each of the spices that you're talking about, you chose a font that has a history that relates to the history of the spice, and then you made the paper with the spice, and just love that those fonts, the letters, have a history that's just as rich as the rest of it.
What interested me and kind of got me down that path was comparing the history of spices and the history of typography, and finding that both of those valuable commodities went across all these cultures and influenced humanity, really. And so to trace that history and see the overlappage was really what got me going down that path. And then talking about taste. How do you decide what you're going to add to a dish? How do you decide how you're going to design something? And those, I realized that felt the same to me, like searching for that flavor. Yeah. So when you organize the show, it looks like you kind of divided into screen printing, fine printing, letterpress. Did you categorize? We talked about these lines being fluid, and it feels organized when you go through it.
That's funny, I was trying not to do that. I guess to some extent, yes, that there's definitely a kind of letterpress section and a book art section, and partly that just happened the way the case is laid out. But what I was really trying to do was do a cross-section through contemporary print arts today, and what kinds of interesting new techniques are people using, or materials are they printing on that are different. So would find people, it's that fluidity you're talking about that I didn't really expect to find but did. That people who were making books were also making etchings, that people were using all kinds of different techniques in their work that maybe would have been categorized before as something else. And, And then there were people who were doing some of both or taking it in new ways. So we were just talking about this one artist, Susan Loudermilk, who's a book artist and a printmaker, mostly in woodcuts, but she likes to also turn them into kind of 3D sculptural kinds of objects. So her books are very sculptural, but then she also made this incredible thing called a zoetrope, which for me as a 19th century geek was terribly exciting because it's like the first motion picture.
Yeah.
So it's all these prints inside a giant tub, and when you spin it, the things in the image appear to move. So the clocks go around and the horse rocks back and forth,
Yeah.
which was fascinating. And then there are artists like Tina Ontko, who's doing these incredible tiny little lithographs of bugs and flowers, and they seem very kind of classic and traditional, and then she cuts them all out and obsessively attaches them each to the wall with a pin, so it's this crazy kind of physical
That's definitely
installation.
fantastic
It's
in the
beautiful,
corner.
yeah, beautiful, crazy thing.
And the shadows that it casts.
Yeah,
Makes
it's
it,
so
it moves
dimensional.
out of printmaking into installation, for sure.
And there's a lot of people moving back and forth like that, so maybe they call it a book, but it really feels like a print to most of us. Or there's that incredible book, the Oregon Pilgrimage in Green, that essentially just kind of cascades down off the wall that doesn't even feel like a book anymore. It's just this kind of sea of paper and image.